So happy to get my Creative Nation paints in the mail. I've been waiting on this. Look at all of these colors. That's gonna be amazing. Alrighty, let's see. So right off the bat, I am really impressed with the vibrance that I'm seeing from these colors. Taking a quick look at the package, they suggest doing quite a few small coats instead of one or two really big coats. And Creative Nation promises flexibility without cracking and, you know, easy to clean, easy to use. I'm really interested to see how this does because I typically work with veg tan leather and do a lot of carving as opposed to painting. So I'm very used to using dye, and I have only used a paint on a couple of projects. So I'm really happy to see and really interested to see how this will perform when put to a couple of veg tan tests, because the normal media for this type of paint is going to be shoes, jackets, stuff like that, whereas the leather I'm using is used to make, you know, wallets, belts, lots of carved things, and I'll pull out something later and show you what I typically do. But I'm thinking there are a couple of tests that I definitely want to put this to and see how it holds up. I'm really happy with the colors, and I have one really big project that I made a couple of years ago, and I painted some eyes on the animals, and it's a pouch that I use every day. And they're kind of starting to flake off a little bit. I don't remember if I ever sealed it or not. And if these do really well, I will probably repaint the eyes on those animals at some point in time. I think painting the eyes gives them a really nice lifelike touch, and so it's something I love to do, and I would absolutely adore having this array of colors at my disposal. So I will be really interested to see how these turn out. And we're back. This is Samantha again, and we're going to test some Creative Nation leather paint. I have a few tests that I'm going to run today, and I'll have to turn the camera off because I don't have the capability to film me doing everything, but I'm going to run just a few tests today, one of which is going to be just color saturation. I always keep scraps of leather around so that I can test different dyes, different paints, different stamps. Here's a piece that you can see I've obviously stamped once upon a time. So I really want to check color saturation here. On this strip, I'm going to do a color test, and then we're going to stress test it by bending it, which is something that Creative Nation promises with their paints and that they can do really well, is resist cracking when we bend. So I'm going to do just color strips like they do with makeup, and then we're going to try a few different coat colors, and we're going to try bending it and see how it works. And then this is a piece of scrap that you can see I've used before. It's been dyed bright purple just for testing a dye that I had, and I want to see how well these paints are going to do on a dark surface, because I do have some projects in mind in regards to painting on a dark surface. And then you'll see I have this plate here. We reduce, reuse, recycle. I want to see if these colors mix, because I'm a fan of pastels, and while I love all the bright colors that are in here, I want to see if I have the capability to make the pastels that I so enjoy. So I'll shoot back in a minute when I have everything done. Alrighty, so we are just going to let these dry. They do splatter as you open them. I'm going to go change because I have it all over my skirt. My recommendation so far would be to shake the bottles before you open them, because a couple of the colors you can see with the kind of lavender, purple, magenta color there, it comes out a little bit lighter. So I would definitely recommend shaking the bottle before you open. And I'm going to give these a second to dry, and then I will be back for final comments. And we're back. Important thing to know about these paints: they will not come out of clothes, because when you go to peel these open, they will splatter. Honestly, if this gets on clothing, your only bet is probably to mix the color of your clothing or a shade lighter and try and paint over it, because it is not coming out. So here's to hoping that it sticks to leather the same way. Now, here's the first piece that I've done. And if you can look and see, as you saw earlier, it had stamps. Now, one of the first things that I noticed about this paint is it is thick. On the box, it suggests multiple small layers to prevent cracking. That's kind of hard because this paint is so thick. As you can see here, just kind of painted over the rows and kind of filled all the lines. This little pink cherry blossom flower here did a little bit better, but as you can see with the leaves, it's hard to either get that balance of you have too much and you have the color you want and it's covering the carving, or you're kind of just dabbing on top of it. So really this is probably a paint for people that don't carve leather. It appears to work okay on some carvings. I would use it on bigger carvings that don't have a lot of detail. I'm not saying I won't use it. It's just probably better for flat painting like shoes, jackets, etc. Probably more of a dye thing for us that carve. But if you have something big and detailed and you want that vibrant pop, yeah, I would say go ahead and reach for a paint, because as you can see, it did do well with color pop, which is something that I appreciate, and it's sometimes hard for us to get with our dyes. And as you notice, it does mix. You can see I made this light pink color here. It apparently functions just like a normal paint. I wasn't sure if we would have anything, different because this was specifically for leather. It appears it's just a formulation for leather that you can mix and use like a normal paint. So I get to have my pastels. And then the next test I did was looking at this piece here. You can see this light strip of pink like right here. That's a single swipe. If you want to paint on something dark, I'm really going to recommend that you use a bright color like this pink, yellow, or green, and that you build it up. Because if you see here, this pink that I've built here did a lot better than this single swipe. And this is actually really interesting. This is a stripe of white from Creative Nation. This is actually a leather acrylic dye that I had before. So as you can see, there's actually a pretty good white in this pack, which I appreciate. White is hard to find. Now, if you see, I tried to actually paint a strip of blue here, and you probably can't see it, but this red here, you can see when it comes across the white. So that's why I suggest using bright colors if you're going to paint over something dark. So if you see, the pink, the yellow, and the green did okay, the blue and the red, not so much. And now last of all, I have our color striped piece, and this is dry. It really doesn't take that long to dry. Hence the fate of my skirt. You can see I've really only been gone for a few minutes, and it dries pretty much as you're putting it on, and I'm not just shellacking it on. I don't really like to paint heavy. I'm actually a person that likes to work with a little bit of like thinner paints, but this is acrylic. It's acrylic in texture, it's acrylic in nature. So as you can see, I've done like my little rainbow of stripes here. We're going to take it and we're going to bend it. And this, I think, is still just a little tacky now that I'm bending it. I didn't really feel it beforehand, but I think it really opens up those kind of cracks and things in the leather. And as you can see, like, I'm not really seeing any cracking here. And this is just a couple of small coats, maybe a flake, but it's really doing pretty well. Most paints would have just been gone by now, so I'm kind of impressed. I'd like to go through and do this again. Like I said, I thought I felt this and I thought it felt like totally dry, but when I move it, I think it feels tacky again. So that's probably something you're going to do, is make sure and let something dry really well before you start wearing it, using it, because it does feel a little tacky again. Not that I'm having any residue on my fingers or anything. But yeah, it seems to be holding up to the crack test, the crack and the bend test pretty well on my veg tan. So overall, I'd say a pretty solid paint. Probably for those that enjoy painting shoes, jackets, belts, stuff like that. Probably not so much for those of us that do intricate carvings. However, I won't exclude it. It's done really well with the tiny little tests that I put it through, and I won't exclude using it on my carvings. I'll just use it on the bigger ones that aren't, full of tiny, minute details. And for those of you that may not understand what I mean when I say carving leather, instead of just sewing or stitching or stamping, this is what I mean, where I've actually taken the leather and carved it to make indentations and used various stamps and tools to get the effects that I want. So when you're seeing stuff like this and these tiny, tiny little hair marks that I've made here for this calf, Creative Nation paint would probably cover those up and fill those in. So that's why I say maybe not the finest detail of work. But for more general just painting uses, or if you stamped a general design, like maybe what I have on the side here, maybe something more general instead of detailed work, but definitely for like eyes like this, I would not hesitate at all to use these paints for eyes. I'm Samantha Christ, and this has been my review of Creative Nation leather paint.